What would you do if all you had was a suitcase, a handful of broken English, and the promise of a stranger? And then, instead of the American dream, you ended up with a jail cell, a bruise across your back, and a charge you didn't understand. This wasn't a CNN headline, not an international scandal, just a black father handcuffed in front of his two children because he had the nerve to ask, "Why did you insult my wife?" A police officer struck him from behind, then claimed it was self-defense. A Christian migration agency blamed the victim, then vanished, leaving his family stranded under the blistering heat of Houston's skyline. And a woman, who didn't even know how to say please in English, knelt before a justice center, pleading for just one thing. Please, let us say half a sentence. This is what happens when justice falls asleep and someone decides to wake it up. In a dusty village in southern Nigeria, a man once believed that if he worked hard enough, God would make a way. But poverty does not wait for faith to finish its prayer. The wind slipped through the cracks of their thatched roof, carrying ash-fine dust that settled gently on Chinedu Okafor's worn shirt. At 43, the former primary school teacher sat hunched beneath the flickering oil lamp, sewing his son's frayed school uniform by hand. Each stitch trembled, not from age, but from the weight of what he could no longer provide. In the corner, Amara, his wife, scrubbed an iron pot with river sand and rainwater gathered from a leaking roof. No one spoke. The silence of their 12-square-meter clay hut wasn't empty. It was heavy, filled with silent prayers that the next day would offer something more than thin porridge and shrinking hope. Chinedu had once believed that education and dignity could change a man's future. He had been top of his class, taught generations with a blackboard borrowed from the village church, and earned the name Teacher Chinedu with real reverence. But the world does not pay its debts in reverence. After the flood washed away his school, after the district budget slashed his salary, and after his mother died, leaving behind nothing but a silver wedding band, Chinedu finally understood what he held in his hands was a belief without soil to take root. And then he saw him. Douglas Mace appeared on a cracked cell phone screen at a neighbor's house, smooth-talking, American-accented, bathed in the gentle lighting of a live stream. Subtitled in Yoruba, "Christian Migration Aid, Bringing Faith to the Promised Land." Douglas didn't need to say much. The images were enough. Smiling black families pushing grocery carts through Walmart, lush green lawns, houses with welcome mats, and in the center, Douglas in a white shirt, cross around his neck, preaching to the camera, "America needs you. They're short on labor. Let faith lead, and we'll take you where the light never goes out." Chinedu didn't know the video was 7 years old. He didn't know that Christian Migration Aid was a front, built on the wreckage of a defunct church, run by two disbarred lawyers and an excommunicated pastor from Indiana. For men like Douglas, faith wasn't something to live by. It was something to sell. 3 days later, Chinedu walked to the only internet-connected home in the village, the pastor's, and applied for an emergency labor visa package. He wrote down his name, Amara's, and the names of their 3 children. In the small notes section, he scribbled in broken English, "I want better school for my son. He like math." The fee was $900, nearly all their savings. But it wasn't the cost that made Amara go silent. It was when Chinedu removed the silver ring, his mother's, out from his own hand, placed it in hers and whispered, "I'll get it back once we reach the other side." He didn't cry, but in his eyes she saw a man fighting to hold on to the last thing he still owned, his dignity. That night, Chinedu stayed up, writing a packing list, a torn cloth suitcase, 2 shirts, birth certificates, a faded university diploma, and a wooden crucifix strung on fishing line, the first gift he ever gave Amara after their wedding. No one in the village knew, no government official knew, but in that smallest hut at the edge of a forgotten world, a dream quietly took form. Not the kind with flags or anthems, but the kind where a man just wants a chance to be decent, without being discarded. The day they left, Lagos was burning hot. The heat rose from the pavement like smoke, curled around their shoes and climbed into the fabric of every hope they'd packed into that one suitcase. At the airport, Chinadu wore his cleanest white shirt, clutched the bag tightly, and stood beneath a sign, Christian Migration Aid, Flight 43 to Houston. Inside his folder, a stamped paper with red ink that read, Labor Visa Application Confirmed. He had signed it 2 days before, inside a tiny office behind an electronics market. Douglas sat behind a printer, smiling like a man who had just won the lottery. He handed Shinadu a 2-page English contract. No Yoruba translation, no explanation. Sign here, Douglas said gently, like a priest giving last rites. Don't worry, God sees everything. This is the best decision you'll ever make. Chinedu hesitated for one heartbeat, then thought of his children under the tamarind tree, of his wife folding the same clothes every week, of his promise that his son would one day touch a real computer. So he signed. He didn't know that signature would become the start of a road with no way back. They landed in Houston at 5:22 a.m. The cold pierced through their donated jackets. Chinedu watched the arrival's gate searching for a sign. Okafor family, welcome. But no one was there. 15 minutes, 30, an hour. The airport emptied. Only the janitors remained, mopping quietly around the edges of their uncertainty. He dialed Douglas. Once, twice, 3 times. Each time. The number you have reached is currently unavailable. Amara said nothing, but her eyes shifted, not in anger, but like a person watching the last pillar of their faith fall into a silent heap. They left the airport with a handwritten address, 19th Street, Sugarland. A cheap cab dropped them off in front of a locked gate. No lights, no voice, no welcome. Strangers behind windows watched but didn't wave. 4 days later, their last few dollars crumpled and fading, Chinedu knocked on the door of a local nonprofit. The staffer, a young Haitian-American woman, looked at his documents and froze. She pulled off her glasses. Her voice lowered. Mr. Chinedu, this isn't a work visa. It's a tourist visa. 90 days. You're not allowed to work. Chinedu sat down slowly. He had believed in ink, in stamps, in promises written in black and white. But now, sitting under buzzing fluorescent lights in a strange city, with 3 children asleep on a bench outside, he realized he hadn't been given a chance. He'd been sold one, and the dream he thought he held in his hands had fallen silently, like a letter returned to sender. After the unanswered phone calls, after the visa no one bothered to explain, after 4 nights curled up on the cold cement floor of a shelter that smelled like chlorine and despair, Chinedu understood something essential about America. There was no starting point here, only a journey that didn't allow turning back, a one-way road. He led Amara and their 3 children out of the shelter on a dull gray morning. Houston in October was colder than expected, with a chill that settled in the bones, not from rain or wind, but from a thick, colorless fog that blurred the street signs, as if the city itself didn't want to be recognized. A Nigerian man he'd met the day before whispered about a place, a cluster of migrant housing units behind an old labor compound, where undocumented families packed themselves into rooms no larger than delivery truck cabins. The rent was $400 a month. No lease, no heating, no promises. Just a rusted padlock, one functioning outlet, and a flickering overhead bulb. They all stayed in a single room. By day, Amara taught the children English letters using the backs of ramen noodle boxes. At night, Chinedu took whatever work he could find. No ID, no insurance, just hands willing to labor. He once washed dishes barehanded in near-boiling water at a back-alley Mexican restaurant. He hauled boxes from 2 a.m. to 6 a.m. at a produce depot, wiped sweat with the sleeves of his only jacket, and returned home just in time to kiss his children goodbye before school. No one asked his name. No one cared that he had once been a teacher. In this city, he was just that black guy without papers, and that label alone was enough for people to assign him a price. Once, he tried to rent a room in a larger housing block with a dozen other African families. 2 weeks in, the landlord kicked him out, not for unpaid rent, but for a reason that burned even colder. Too many dark-skinned people under one roof. He said it in the hallway, loudly, in front of Chinedu's children, as if repeating an unwritten law passed down by a system no one ever signed, but everyone followed. Chinedu didn't argue. He lowered his head, packed their belongings, and walked his family out in silence. Amara whispered almost to herself, "Don't they see we're human too?" He didn't answer, because truthfully, he no longer knew. Since the day he arrived in America, Chinedu had never left Houston, but somehow he felt like he was always moving, past nameless corners, through streets that belonged to no one, through restaurants where everyone kept their heads down, hoping not to be noticed. Every day was a new stop, a new boss, a new stare, and the only constant was the quiet determination to feed his children one more meal. Sometimes after delivering food late at night, he would sit on his bicycle seat a moment longer, staring up at the lit windows of high-rise buildings, wondering, has anyone ever seen me? Out of millions who've come here, has anyone ever known what it feels like to be labeled illegal just for wanting to work? One night he was stopped mid-route by a local patrol. The officer asked for ID. Chinedu raised both hands calmly, explained he had no documentation, showed his insulated food bag and a blurry fake ID that had cost him 3 days' pay. The officer studied him for a beat, then said flatly, "You know what you're doing, don't you?" Chinedu didn't flinch, didn't raise his voice. He just answered, not like a man defending himself, but like someone who had grown used to bleeding quietly. "I'm not hiding. I just don't have the papers yet to walk like a normal person." The officer didn't soften, but Chinedu, for the first time in weeks, looked at himself clearly and saw not a ghost, not a fugitive, but a man still standing, still carrying the weight of a broken dream on his shoulders in a land where strangers rarely make room for strangers. The next morning, he got back on his bike, rode past the same intersections, followed the same outdated GPS. Still no benefits, still no rest days. But this time, he fastened his helmet strap a little tighter, as if telling himself, as long as I can keep riding, I won't let anyone take away the last piece of my humanity still in my hands. December nights in Houston were stone silent and colder than they looked. In the southwest part of the city, the streets stretched out like a forgotten stage, deserted, dim. At 11:42 p.m., a notification lit up on Chinedu's worn-out delivery app. Sandwiches, milk, cold medicine, Fairgrove. The fee was only $7, but he accepted without hesitation. Not because of the money, but because one of the items listed was a carton of Dutch Lady milk, the only kind that didn't upset his daughter's stomach. He pedaled through rows of suburban homes, their porch lights spilling long, golden beams across the pavement, like unanswered questions. His fingers were numb, but his mind was still working, calculating how many minutes it would take to finish this drop and get back before sunrise. If he made it, he could buy a bit of chicken from the discount market and cook porridge for breakfast. Tomorrow might be better. He just needed tonight to pass without trouble. But fate, as always, was never that polite. The moment he turned onto Fairgrove, a police car, no siren, no flashing lights, cut across the bike lane and blocked his path. Two officers stepped out. One was older, heavier, bald under a black cap, with a look that scanned for guilt before facts. "Hey, you! What are you doing here?" Chinedu stopped the bike and instinctively raised both hands. I'm delivering food, sir." He spoke slowly, clearly, though his breath fogged the air with every syllable. "Papers? I don't have USID, he exhaled. "I'm just working, sir." "Working?" the older cop sneered, circling the bike like a predator sniffing for weakness. His eyes landed on the fraying thermal bag strapped to the side. "You think you're helping society, leech?" Chinedu said nothing, not because he didn't understand, but because he understood too well. The officer stared at him, then without warning yanked open the thermal bag. No warrant, no questions, no concern. He shoved his hand inside, flinging the contents across the sidewalk. The milk carton tumbled out, hit the concrete, and split in half. Cold, white liquid oozed onto the pavement like sweet blood. Chinedu froze. Then quietly he stepped forward. Not fast, not angry, but changed. His eyes held something different now. "That was for my daughter," he said softly. "She can't drink powdered milk. Only this one." "Don't move," the officer barked. But Chinedu bent down anyway, slowly to pick up the broken carton, as if the spilled milk carried the last remnants of his pride. I said don't move, you piece of... Then came the kick. A brutal jab to the thigh sent him sprawling into his bicycle. His head slammed against the delivery box. When he looked up again, something inside him had snapped. Why would you do that? He asked, voice trembling but firm. Because I can, and you can't, the officer hissed. That sentence made Chinedu rise. No punches, no threats, just one push. Both hands to the officer's chest. Not rage, reflex. A father trying to protect the last thread of comfort for his child. Just one push, but it was enough to condemn an entire life. 3 minutes later, he was on the ground, wrists cuffed behind his back with steel tight enough to cut. Blood trickled into his eyes from his temple. The scent of warm milk and wet earth mixed beneath his face. Assaulting an officer. Non-compliance. No identification. No counsel assigned. Suspect is not a legal resident. Chinedu didn't argue, didn't speak. He simply closed his eyes and let his cheek rest against the frozen concrete. As if, for the first time, he no longer believed his prayers had anywhere to go. That night, he didn't return to the tiny room his family shared. Amara stayed up past dawn, dialing a number that never rang. Her children lay sleeping in her arms. The silence in their home was so deep, it felt like the world itself had paused to hold its breath. Only one thing remained. A dried streak of milk on the lip of a crushed thermal bag, left behind in the parking lot of a police station. A fragile mark of a father who had crossed a line, not out of rebellion, but because there were simply no more lines left to retreat behind. Amara wore the thinnest sweater she owned, its sleeves fraying at the cuffs, as she walked through southeast Houston with her 2 children. The older was 11, the younger barely 5. They approached a building with no bright signage, no security guard, just a strip of aging office units nestled between rows of weathered homes. A small tarnished metal plate at the entrance read simply, Community Legal Aid Center, Houston Division. She wasn't sure if anyone inside would hear her out, but the evening before, on her way home from the local Ghanaian church, an elderly woman sitting on the front steps had stopped her, gently clutching her wrist. Your man's been taken, child, but don't go knocking on doors alone. Find Ms. Jasmine. She knows how to speak to the kind of people who never hear us. Amara didn't know who Jasmine was, but there was something in the woman's eyes, slow, steady, full of years and knowing, that made Amara believe her. She stepped into the building, dust still clinging to her hand, and the strap of the faded canvas bag slung over her shoulder. The children stayed close, silent, not out of fear, but from instinct. The kind of instinct kids develop too early when the world teaches them to be quiet before it ever teaches them to speak. Behind the front desk sat a young receptionist. She said something, fast, clipped, clear, but Amara couldn't follow. She shook her head softly, then opened her bag and pulled out a photograph, old and worn at the edges. In it, Chinedu stood between the children, holding Amara's hand. Behind them, rice fields swayed in the Nigerian sun. His eyes in that photo shimmered with a kind of hope, as if he had believed, when it was taken, that everything was about to change. Amara placed the photo on the counter. Her hands trembled. We didn't steal, she said, each word breaking like dry wind against clay. We didn't hurt anyone. We only want to live. The receptionist paused. There was something in Amara's voice, raw, unpolished, but so achingly honest, that made her slowly rise to her feet. She didn't ask for a supervisor. She didn't ask for details. She picked up the radio and spoke into it quietly. Get Attorney Crockett. It's urgent. Jasmine Crockett appeared 4 minutes later, still holding a half-finished cup of coffee. She had been reviewing a housing discrimination case when the call came through. She normally didn't take unscheduled walk-ins, but the receptionist's eyes had told her something this case file couldn't. When Jasmine saw Amara, a thin woman in a threadbare sweater, standing in the middle of the lobby with 2 silent children who looked like they had been folded into corners all their lives, she stopped. Not because of the photo, not because of the broken English, but because of the eyes. Those eyes pulled her back, to a night long ago, when she was a child sitting beside her father in their old car. He had worked electrical maintenance. A patrol officer pulled them over. No explanation. No warning. Just a baton pounding the glass and a voice barking, "You crossed the line, you stupid nut!" She had seen her father, a man who had never raised his voice at anyone, dragged out and slammed against the hood for the crime of being in the wrong lane, with the wrong skin. Jasmine tightened her grip on her satchel. Then she stepped forward. "Why are you here?" Amara didn't understand the question. She bowed her head, and then, in a moment where time itself seemed to still, she dropped to her knees, hands clasped together, and whispered, "Please help. He's my husband. No one will tell me where he is." The room froze. Jasmine didn't move, but her heart pounded, not from anger, but from a quiet shame, that it had taken a nameless, voiceless woman kneeling at her feet for the system she worked in to feel something at all. "You don't need to kneel," Jasmine said, her voice softening. "I'm listening, and if something's wrong, I won't let it stay buried." She crouched down, lowering herself to Amara's eye level. Her hand gently touched the woman's shoulder, not as a lawyer, not as a professional, but as a woman who once knew what it felt like to be dismissed before she even opened her mouth. In that moment, without needing paperwork or affidavits or sworn testimonies, Jasmine knew this was a case she could not walk away from. The next day, Jasmine Crockett didn't return straight to her office. Instead, she made her way to a faded old print shop in Zone 3, the kind of place where undocumented workers often came to recover lost forms, forge missing pieces of paperwork, and try, quietly, to exist on paper. She didn't start by asking names. She asked something else. "Has there ever been a company called Christian Migration Aid registered through here?" The shop owner squinted, then pulled out a fraying ledger. It took nearly half an hour of slow page turning before he found a faded line of ink. "Christian Migration Aid. Contact address, 9122 Oak Ridge. Sub-office of Church of the Creator." Jasmine looked up. She knew that church. It had shut down in 2018 after a scandal involving misused donations. On record, Douglas Mace had once been listed as a spiritual advisor for its ministry. In a world where justice was still a matter of discretion, truth could hide behind the holiest words: faith, salvation, charity, all repurposed as masks for an underground operation that trafficked in hope, using the poor as product and belief as currency. Jasmine printed everything she could find: tax records, entity filings, letters of registration. She scanned every stamp, every seal, and then she saw it. The seal on Chinadu's contract matched exactly. Same dimensions, same off-center tilt, same smudge curve on the letter D. There was no question now. The so-called migration agency was nothing more than a ghost, wearing the tattered robe of a disgraced church. That evening, Jasmine sat alone in her office, the lights off, only the glow of her computer casting long shadows across her desk. She pulled up the old database of complaints, and there, buried in an archive, she found a note filed under the name Manuel Obando from El Salvador. He had submitted a complaint months earlier, alleging he was assaulted by a Houston police officer, for no reason, while walking home from a shift. Attached was a 42-second video clip, captured by a cheap body camera his wife had sewn into his uniform, just in case it happened again. She clicked play. The footage flickered into view. Shaky, black and white, wind whispering across the mic. A thin man in a work uniform stood on the sidewalk, hands empty and still. Across the street, an officer approached. No questions, no commands. Then suddenly swung a baton, striking the man's shoulder with blunt force. "I didn't do anything," the man screamed. I'm just going home." There was heavy breathing, a thud, a soft ugh, then black. Jasmine rewound the footage and froze on frame 19. She recognized the profile: slightly slanted eyes, a squared jaw, a glint of a nameplate catching the low light. Haskins. Her hand clenched, not from surprise, but from a slow, rising disgust. This was the same officer who had beaten an innocent man from El Salvador. now doing the same to a Nigerian father over a carton of milk. She dialed the number listed on the original complaint. A woman picked up. Her voice trembled. Manuel's not here anymore. They deported him. No hearing, no evidence. They said he was a security risk. No trial, no lawyer, no right to rebut, just a plane ticket and a man erased. Jasmine sat motionless. In her mind, she saw Amara again, the woman who had knelt, voiceless, before a system built to ignore her. She thought of the dozens of complaints she'd seen marked insufficient grounds, each one a cry smothered in red tape. How could a single officer assault so many people and never be questioned? How could records vanish only when the victims had no voice? How could justice become just another word carved into the courthouse wall? She opened her window and breathed in the cold night air. Outside, the city hummed with engines and chatter, unaware that on the third floor of a quiet building, a lawyer had just uncovered a scent no paper could hide, the smell of money stained with blood. She tapped her fingers against the desk, not from impatience, but like sealing a contract with herself. I won't let this case vanish like Manuel. I can't undo the past, but I still have enough courage to protect the truth for tomorrow. The hearing room on the third floor of the Houston Office of Internal Review wasn't large, but it was designed as if truth itself needed to be quarantined. Frosted glass, soundproof walls, sterile white lights. Everything about the space gave the feeling of a sealed container for secrets, not a place where they might be uncovered. Jasmine Crockett entered at exactly 9:01 a.m., wearing a black blazer, carrying nothing but a slim folder clipped with a bent staple. In front of her sat 6 people, 5 men, 1 woman, most of them white. At the center of the table, Donald Creel, silver-haired, expressionless, a veteran attorney known for once successfully absolving an oil conglomerate from environmental liability. No one stood. No one greeted her. When she introduced herself, only one nodded. The rest flipped through their notes with the casual indifference of those who already believe they know what matters. I'm here as legal counsel on behalf of an immigrant family affected by a series of violations, involving police misconduct, illegal brokerage, and systemic oversight failure. Creel cut in, his tone brisk without a trace of hospitality. Ms. Crockett, let's get to the point. This committee is not a court of law. We conduct scheduled oversight reviews only. Jasmine didn't blink. I understand, and it's precisely because your scheduled reviews have never once mentioned names like Chinedu or Manuel or Amara that I'm here today. A sigh, a tap of a pen, a tight-lipped smile that said, "You're wasting our time, dear." She opened her folder and placed 6 photocopies on the table. This is a copy of a brokerage contract from Christian Migration Aid, stamped with the seal of a church that no longer exists. And this, she held up a second page, is a list of humanitarian sponsorships signed by a law enforcement officer. That officer's name is Troy Haskins. Creel's eye twitched, only slightly, but his voice remained steady. These documents are not enough to establish criminal grounds. Ms. Crockett, are you manufacturing drama for effect? Jasmine offered a quiet smile. Not the polite kind, but the smile of someone who already knows what the room is afraid of. I'm not manufacturing anything. I'm simply rearranging the puzzle pieces the system has deliberately scrambled. A middle-aged woman on the panel glanced at one of the pages, then paused. Wait, is that a bank seal? Jasmine nodded. A $12,000 transfer from Christian Migration Aid to the account of Officer Haskins' wife, routed through a shell organization called the Houston Legal Outreach Fund Silence. She continued slower now, her voice cutting with precision. That organization is operated by none other than Mr. Creel himself, under the banner of legal advocacy for the community. The room went still, utterly still. For a moment, it wasn't a hearing room. It was a fault line. And Jasmine had stepped right on the crack. Suddenly, all the interruptions, the condescending smiles, the carefully phrased dismissals snapped into focus. Not arbitrary, not accidental, but defensive. because the one asking questions had just pulled the mask off the one doing the judging. Creel pressed his hands to his forehead, then looked up, tone shifting. Ms. Crockett, if what you're saying is true, this should be brought to a criminal investigation, not this committee. Jasmine didn't budge. She leaned forward, not threatening but unwavering, her gaze piercing through the polished composure of the room. It will be. The originals will be in federal hands within 24 hours. But I brought them here first because I need all of you to understand something. Justice isn't a quarterly spreadsheet. It's the principle that those at the top don't get to decide who stays quiet and who gets to live unbothered. One panelist quietly lowered the page he'd been holding, adjusting his glasses with no words. Another cleared his throat, not from illness, but from discomfort. And then something rare happened. No one dismissed her. No one redirected. No one told her her time was up. Only silence remained, thick, weighted, and dense with defeat. The kind of silence that settles when every defense has already been stripped away. Outside, a soft rain began to fall, not hard enough to wash away injustice, but just enough to dampen the collars of men who had long believed themselves untouchable. And for anyone listening, anyone watching, a pulse of dopamine spread. Not from a punch thrown, but from a truth revealed, undeniable, and finally, unavoidable. 3 days after the quiet storm of that hearing, an internal review session was held. This time, for the first time in months, publicly. Jasmine stepped into the courtroom with nothing but a small silver USB drive looped around her wrist on a worn cloth string. She didn't carry stacks of documents. She didn't need a slideshow or a binder. Just one video, 42 seconds long, grainy, shaky, tilted, and powerful enough to collapse an entire wall of denial. The chamber was packed. Committee members sat rigid. Journalists lined the benches behind them. Officers stood at the back, stone-faced. And there, seated at the far table, was Douglas Mace. Pale gray suit, arms folded, eyes forward, as if he still believed he got to decide who was allowed to listen. Jasmine walked to the podium, slid the USB into the projection system, and said calmly into the microphone, "This clip was submitted to our office anonymously. It contains no effects. No narration, no editing, just what actually happened." The screen lit up, and the room fell into a silence so dense it felt like a sanctuary, as if even God had paused to hear it. The image appeared. Manuel Obando, eyes wide, panicked, hands raised. His voice cracked. "I didn't do anything. Please don't hit me." Then the sound. Whack. Haskins, clear as day. No command, no warning. A blow to the left shoulder, another to the ribs. Manuel crumpled. The camera fell to the ground, the last frame catching a pair of boots pressing down on his jacket. The screen went black. Jasmine looked up at the panel. No one said a word. Then from the audience, a low whisper, a sharp intake of breath. Someone murmured, "It's plain as day." Jasmine remained standing. You might ask where this came from, why it's only surfacing now. The truth is, the ones who carry the proof are often the ones with the least protection. This society taught them that if they speak, they'll be deported, mocked, or worse, forgotten. Several committee members lowered their heads. Creel leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, as if trying to hide the beginnings of a tremor. Jasmine's voice steadied. "But I didn't come here to show a clip. I came to bring a witness." The courtroom doors opened. A tall, middle-aged woman entered, draped in a dark indigo coat, her face partly hidden beneath a silk scarf. She didn't carry a purse. She didn't scan the room. She walked straight to the witness stand, every step reclaiming a piece of the dignity she had once surrendered. Jasmine spoke with a calm weight. "This is Grace Amandi, former freelance interpreter for Christian Migration Aid." Grace slowly removed her scarf. The room held its breath. "I translated for hundreds of people," she said softly, "from Nigeria, Haiti, El Salvador, Ghana. I told them their visas were valid, that they would be protected. I looked into their eyes, and I lied, because I believed what Douglas Mace gave me was real." She faltered, lowered her head. I'm sorry. I thought I was helping, but I was doing the opposite. She reached into her coat and pulled out a phone. On it, screenshots, unedited, time-stamped, of bank statements, names of migrants, file IDs, and payment schedules for sponsorship packages, all taken from a laptop she once had access to. Jasmine held up a printed sheet. And this is the most damning detail. She tapped the last transaction. Recipient, Kayla Mace, Douglas Mace's daughter. Destination account, Kayla Legal Consulting LLC. Note, Tier A, Immigration Sponsorship, Nigeria Group. Douglas shot up, slamming his hand on the table. Objection! This is fabricated. Jasmine didn't flinch, didn't turn. It's not fabricated. Ms. Amandi is willing to testify, and the files have already been backed up and submitted before this hearing. No one rose to defend Douglas. No lawyer spoke on his behalf. Behind him, Haskins sat frozen, face pale, fists clenched. Even Creel said nothing, his eyes locked on the tabletop in front of him, as if searching for a way out that had already disappeared. The room sank into a golden silence, not the silence of avoidance, but the kind that falls when there's nothing left to hide. And for those listening, in the courtroom, online, over the radio, something stirred deep in their chest, a tremor of release, because everything they had ever suspected, everything they had wanted to scream about this broken system, had just been laid bare, in the light, before the public. And no one, not Haskins, not Douglas, not anyone who had stepped on the voiceless, could hide behind the veil anymore. No sirens, no flashing barricades, just a black SUV pulling up in front of a luxury-gated community in the Heights, exactly 6:03 a.m. the next morning. Douglas Mace was led out wearing silk pajamas, hair uncombed, eyes bloodshot from a night of sleepless pacing. His wrists were cuffed, but he kept his chin high, until a reporter from the local station shouted, "Do you have anything to say to the 137 families who trusted you?" His shoulders flinched for a split second. And then, under the relentless pop of camera shutters, Douglas lowered his head. For the first time, not an apology, but because there was nowhere left to run. By afternoon, the preliminary indictment was public. Charges of human trafficking, falsifying immigration documents, money laundering through religious charities, and violating multiple federal statutes protecting migrant populations. The money trail, from Christian migration aid to the private account of Kayla Legal Consulting, had been tracked for 18 months by an independent financial forensics team. Jasmine's discovery had provided the final key, the one piece that made suspicion undeniable. Across town at Houston Police Department Precinct 4, Officer Troy Haskins was suspended before noon. He didn't shout like Douglas. He didn't deny. He didn't deflect. He simply sat behind his desk, staring blankly ahead, turning his silver badge over in his fingers like someone touching the ghost of something they thought would last forever. A security camera caught the moment he removed his name tag from his uniform. No one ordered him to. No one forced it. But that motion, quiet, deliberate, echoed louder than any bullet he'd ever fired. Jasmine did not attend the press conference. She declined interviews. When a journalist called asking if she wanted to comment on her victory, she replied with just one sentence. "This isn't a victory. It's a wound that's finally been bandaged, on a body that's been festering for far too long." She didn't need flashbulbs, didn't want applause. She knew full well, a man like Douglas being arrested, a cop like Haskins being suspended, that was just the surface cracking. Beneath that were still countless stories untold, families who had never found the words, children still waking at night, wondering what their parents had done wrong. Justice might have won today, but tomorrow it would need defending all over again. As Jasmine walked down the courthouse steps, she passed a group of young black students watching a clip of the hearing on their phones. One girl turned to her, voice hushed. "Do you think things will ever change?" Jasmine paused. Didn't answer right away. She just looked at the girl, as if seeing a younger version of herself, 20 years earlier, still believing that law was a clean road you only had to walk straight to reach the end. Then she said, quietly but firmly, "I don't think things will change. I know someone's going to stop letting them stay the same." A year passed. The Okafor family now lived in a small ground-floor apartment on the south side of Houston. Modest, nothing fancy, but theirs. It had a lease with Chinedu's name on it, working lights, utility bills paid on time, a front doorbell that rang when someone pressed it. Chinedu no longer rode a bicycle for deliveries. He drove a second-hand pickup for a refrigeration supply shop and attended night classes in English twice a week. Every so often, he would jot down new vocabulary in a notebook. Still the teacher he'd always been, now studying a dream he'd once buried. Amara worked part-time in the kitchen at a Haitian community center. No need for perfect English, just on steady hands and heart. She prepared meals for those walking the same hard road she once had. They weren't wealthy, but they were living. And on that morning, the first day of the new school year, their two children wore school uniforms for the first time in their lives. Clean white collars, polished shoes, hair braided by their mother's hands. They held hands as they crossed the schoolyard, walking slow, steady, all the way to room 4. Chinedu and Amara stood at a distance. They didn't follow, didn't wave. They just watched, eyes meeting for one quiet second, saying everything. That breath, that single breath, felt like the first full one they'd taken in years. Inside the classroom, the teacher found a small, folded piece of paper on her desk. Someone had left it quietly while she'd been talking to another parent. The paper was creased, edges worn. Inside, handwritten in the shaky script of a child still learning, it read, "I want to be a doctor because no one healed my father when he needed it." The teacher didn't know who wrote it. There was no name. But when she looked up, she saw a boy in the back row, watching her. He didn't smile. He didn't look away. He just looked, with the gaze of someone who had once seen his father kneel and still believed in tomorrow. Justice, the teacher would later say, isn't always some big event. Sometimes it starts with a seat in a classroom where every child, no matter where they come from, is called by the right name and allowed to live like they belong.